Welcome to Rock Paper Hand Grenades. I wore my nicest Johnny Cash T-shirt tonight.
Nothing wrong with the
I'm
Johnny.
with here with Eric. I'm here by myself and Carla,
Your other imaginary
my
friend.
other imaginary friend. I had an imaginary friend in school, and I found out she was cheating on me.
So you had
It
to
was
break
pretty.
up?
I had to cut her loose. You know, it's just like that's not okay. You know, if I fabricate something, it should stay with me. It
Yes.
shouldn't go off on its own.
No.
It shouldn't have a mind of its own, so to speak. You know, so that was pretty upsetting part of my childhood that I don't really want to talk about tonight. Before we get started, I wanted to talk about, and I forget the gentleman's name because I don't know him, but I do know that Dave Booten, who is running for to get elected to Senate again, he's not incumbent because he missed a couple, one or two terms, ran an ad against his opponent, saying that he was not sticking up for the victims of sex abuse because he didn't vote for Marsies Law.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Marsies Law, and so I'm just saying this. We're having him on next week. I've forgotten the gentleman's name because I get brain damage. But I wanted to talk about this at least twice before the election because Dave Booten is either ignorant or he's lying. One of two possibilities: either he's ignorant of how bad Marsies Law was, or he is aware of it and is attacking him anyway in spite of the facts. The gentleman that is in the House now that's running against Dave did the right thing. Marsies Law was a constitutional abomination. You're somebody who is familiar with the Constitution
I am.
quite a bit.
Yes.
You are aware that most constitutional amendments protect the people from the government,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
That's typically the Second Amendment is to protect your rights. The
certainly
First
how
Amendment
it's
protect your
supposed
rights.
to work.
Right.
Yes.
It's supposed to protect the people from an oppressive government. Marsy's Law protected the government from the people. The last third of Marsy's Law, all it did was give complete immunity to the cops. That's why the Attorney General was in favor of it. And that bothers me. It shouldn't be that. If you're in that position, you shouldn't be that self-serving. The courts, the cops, the municipalities, everybody was in favor of it because it gave them complete immunity. If they had done their job wrong, there was no recourse for the people. Okay? That was just a tip of the iceberg of how bad Marsy's Law was.
And it went down in flames, didn't it?
Well, that's not the problem is the Senate passed it 20-3.
Oh, wow.
Okay? And as much as I'm not crazy about Andy Sanborn, he's one of the people who voted against it. Bob Gaida voted against it, and Kevin Avard voted against it. So kudos to those guys for voting against, because it was absolutely positively horrible. It expanded the because you think of Marsy's Law, you think of victims.
Right.
This guy from California who's actually just got arrested again for some perverted crap came here with his checkbook and just started writing checks. Okay, so the governor's on board, all the Senate's on board, all the lobbyists are on board except one. The only lobbying group that I know didn't support it was Senator Clegg, former Senator Clegg. So anyway, so you have all the lobbyists, most of this, 90% of the Senate and the governor all in favor of this thing. It comes to my committee. It was a joint committee, Judiciary and Criminal Justice. It comes to our committee, and it was like a legislative wood chipper. Because when you read it, on the surface it says, protecting victims. Everybody wants to protect victims. How can you be voting against protecting victims? Right. And that's what Booten is banking on, is that people won't know the truth. He's banking on that most voters won't have any clue what was in there and will think badly of his opponent just because. So anyway, it expanded the definition of victim. First of all, the victim was not the victim necessarily of a sex crime or abuse or anything else. It was any crime. from somebody busting the window on your car to stealing a bag of chips out of CVS. It was any crime, okay? It also expanded what the crimes were that had to be protected under this constitutional amendment. It expanded who the victims were, because it wasn't just the victim of the crime. Let's say somebody steals a bag of chips out of CVS. Well, now the store's the victim. Okay, so the store is now the victim, or anybody, maybe the person who was working behind the counter that day was emotionally upset because they saw somebody steal the chips, and they were really I'm obviously using a ridiculous example, but they were upset, okay, and they saw this, and they were really, bothered by this, so they're a victim. The woman that was waiting in line, who was delayed from buying her products because this guy stole chips, she's now a victim. Anybody tangentially affected by a crime is now a victim. Okay? So let's say a major crime where somebody throws a bomb into the arena up here or something like that, but there's hundreds of people. Well, their families are victims. You could have 1,000 victims in one incident. So a Democrat asked the Republican governor of the state. He only took one question. He walked in with this entourage of victims and holding the red, white, and just the theater was palpable. And walks in, sits down, and goes on this diatribe about victims and how we got to care. Representative Paul Birch, a Democrat, asked the governor, well, if you're going to expand the definition of victims, and down below it says that victims are due timely restitution, well, that means the state's the only one with pockets deep enough to give 100 victims of a crime restitution. Where are you going to come up with the money? Who's paying for these victims? The sitting governor of the state of New Hampshire sat there in that committee and got offended. Methinks I'll protest too much. Gets totally offended by the question and ends his statement with, thinking about the money is the old way of doing things. That's a direct quote, the old way of doing things. It's like, wow. Wow, you'd think he actually paid taxes or something, So that's part of the problem. I mean, I could go on for a while. The Marsies Law was so horrible. Once the Judiciary Committee and the Criminal Justice Committee got done with it, by the time it got to the following week, the Attorney General was aware, because people talk, that he and the governor's bill, Marsies Law, was on life support. So he goes and presents it to the committee again and tries to amend it to eliminate a couple things that they knew were problems. And my mentor, Representative Rollard from Goffstown, and I'd have to look it up to show you, but there's a sentence in there that says, it has all this effect and any other law pertaining to victims.
Wow.
Okay, so that little sentence, and that's not a direct quote, but it's close enough. That little sentence, she said, Mr. Attorney General, doesn't that quite clearly say that any law written about victims in the past or in the future has constitutional parity? The guy sat there with just like this deer in the headlights. He had never thought of it. He's getting paid $100 and something thousand a year as the state's attorney general. He comes in to testify on a bill, and he didn't know. He did not have a clue that was in there.
That bill, I understand, sort of came from California
Yes.
or some other place. And,
yeah.
and that certainly seems to be a trend, that we're seeing where, other people's bad ideas are being brought into New Hampshire. And certainly one of the reasons, I'm running again is because I chose New Hampshire as my home. I love it here. I love the low taxes. I love the quality of living. And I think we need to be very, very careful about sort of opening these floodgates to especially to states that, quite frankly, are either bankrupt or on the,
They're on the verge of it.
Yeah, brink of bankruptcy. Certainly in California, there have been several cities that have actually gone bankrupt.
They're hemorrhaging actual real employers because they're getting the heck out while the getting's good.
Yeah, and so, certainly, I think when I'm in the Senate, that's something we should look at. Why are we bringing things that aren't necessarily a concern, aren't concerns that come from our constituents necessarily, but these sort of outside forces that are saying we have to make New Hampshire like everywhere else. New Hampshire is unique. I think the people here are unique, and we should relish in that uniqueness.
Yeah, it was actually Representative Birch again, my nemesis Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. I say that, he's a nice guy, who pointed that out. He said, well, if you ask people that are actually the victims of the crimes we're really supposed to be talking about here, what most people think of when they think about Marsies Law, well over 90% of them are satisfied with how the court case went. There's already laws on the books. Like you said, they're trying to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed with a constitutional amendment. Well, you've seen most constitutional amendments are maybe a sentence long. It's a concept.
Right.
It is not law. It's a concept. A concept that is basically superior to law, and that all law should be subject to, but it's still a concept. This was 3 paragraphs long.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think there are 2 great constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot this fall. Do you know about those?
Yes, I do. I just can't remember them off the top of my head because I was kind of obsessed with this.
So the ones about taxpayer standing and sort of bringing back taxpayer standing, i.e., if someone busts a tax cap or something like that, we are able to then take, our officials to court and to hold them accountable, so we would have standing as taxpayers again.
The genesis of that was somebody tried to sue, I think, a town, or I forget who they were trying to sue over what they were doing with taxes, and the Supreme Court said they don't have standing.
Right.
And so really, so taxpayers don't have standing in their own town to sue the town because their taxes are being abused? And I forget. I remember hearing it. I think it went to our committee too, but I'm not positive. It was a while ago. But yeah, it's like common sense. Obviously, you have standing, but the court has chipped away at people's rights.
Yeah, and so, certainly I'm going to vote in favor of that one because, as you say, we should have standing, and then the second one has to do with privacy, which is an issue I'm quite interested in as well, and so it's a perfect little one sentence. I like the shorter they are, the less wiggle room there is. Clearly everyone can understand what it's about. And that one is just, that we have the right to privacy, and that we can live our lives free of government intrusion. So both of those look pretty good to me. So, so I'm excited to see them on the ballot.
Well, the privacy one's tougher because most people have conceded their privacy, so much so that a lot of people are going to go to the polls and say, what do you mean? They don't understand how important that privacy is.
And, I don't know if it's entirely fair to say people have sort of conceded it. It's one of those things, like you were saying earlier, where it's sort of been chipped at and taken away, and that people maybe don't really understand. I mean, certainly it doesn't happen in New Hampshire to my knowledge at this stage, but there are other states, where if you're in a traffic stop, they will, draw your blood now right at the stop. They will search you with
How do they do
penetrative searches. That kind of stuff is actually happening on the roadside. So once again, New Hampshire actually has a culture of liberty, I think, and people still sort of care about their rights, which is how it should be.
Right.
And so, with that one, it has to do with searches and seizures, and just sort of this idea of something as simple as your phone, which is pretty much, our computers now.
Right.
So you should have a right to privacy on your phone.
That's a handheld computer.
Yeah, pretty much. That fits in our pocket, which is amazing and wonderful, right? Technology is an incredible thing. But, hand in hand with that would go something like license plate scanners, which I believe actually did pass last time, right? So that's something that, is not great, right? So just to give an example, in I was down south somewhere. I think it was in New Mexico. There is actually a law that they're trying to pass. I don't think it's passed yet, where it'll be illegal to park your car backwards in your own driveway, because it's one of those states that you only have
Really?
license plates on one side of your car. And the police want to be able to drive through neighborhoods and scan everyone's license plates. Now, the
What, to
idea,
make sure everybody's home tucked in beds?
I mean, I guess, you know, I mean, it's sort of part of that step. As much as technology is wonderful to set us free, it's also a tool that can sort of be abused and misused in, you know, for the wrong reasons. And sometimes the reasons are actually, you know, come from a good place. You know, maybe it's to be protective and, you know, all of that good stuff. But ultimately, I think it should be up to us to say, well, you know, no.
You're more educated than me. So who was it that said that about people running who want power, they mean to do good. I forget
Power corrupts,
No, but
absolutely,
they
that
mean-
one. I'm sorry, I can't read your mind tonight.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've forgotten the quote, but basically it implies that, yes, they mean to do good, but they mean to do good whether you like it or not.
Right, and you know, and it's sort of unintended consequences,
Yeah.
right? Which is why I think, you know, less laws are better, you know, which is why I'm sort of a constitutionalist and a limited government person, because then it's like, okay, these are the rules. Let's stick to that program, because every time we write new laws, I mean, it's 2018. How many new laws do we really need?
1,000. I actually stopped. Somebody says, "Well, you don't introduce, you know, very many bills." I says, "Yeah, there's enough. There's like 1,000 bills. I mean, I'm on Judiciary Committee. We're getting like 60 bills. How can you reasonably go through those effectively in a very limited amount, because you only got 2 months to do all 60, because then it has to be sent, what passes has to be sent over to the Senate, and then the Senate has 2 months, and then we do some horse trading, and then that's the end of the year. So it's not like you have an unlimited resources. You have basically volunteers sitting there sifting through 1,000 ideas that people don't in the House many of them don't seem to understand the time. It's like if you take you know, there's 400 legislators. If you take, you know, 15 minutes of time on a bill on the House floor, that's 100 hours of people's volunteer time you just took for your harebrained idea.
And you got $1 an hour, and then you were paid for the year.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like volunteer time. It should be cherished, and it's not. It's just like, wow, I got another idea. Here, I'll introduce this. I'll introduce this.
And maybe, you know, that's something that culturally one can work on, right? So where it's the trend should be towards, why don't we look at some bills that we can repeal, you know,
Right.
that are, you know, archaic regulations, or, you know, just things where it's like, well, you know, do we really even care about this anymore? So certainly, you know, people have asked me, well, what are the bills that you're going to introduce? And I was like, I think, you know, at first I'm just going to, you know, look and learn a little, but also let's look at things that we can repeal. You know, there's a lot of old regulations that we can just sort of start to sift off the books. And,
Right.
you know, and everyone has a bright idea, but the question is, does it need to be a law, or can this be someone's pet project that we can do in the private sector? You know,
Right.
like I mean, you know, there's so many great ideas out there, but not everything has to be something that we make a law, which means we are forcing everyone
To abide by
your good idea. And instead, let's take a lot of these things to the marketplace. Let's take them to the community. We have all these outreach tools now, and be like, if you care about this thing, go convince people voluntarily to be like, that's an awesome idea, and I'm going to help you do that, and do it on a community level.
I had one of the guys that works at Allsafe say, you know, we really need to license locksmiths, right? And I said, no, I really don't want to do that. And the reason is because I've seen it up there for years, and what happens is the state will license name your poison, okay? And at first it's a good idea because maybe that group of people is used like hairdressers. They're using chemicals that could harm people or, whatever. Okay, I kind of get the intention is nice, but what happens? They introduce the law, then they have a meeting to try to define what the qualifications are to get the license, and that's good, and everybody's okay with it. And then over time, that's a very small group of people who have control over who gets licensed.
Yep.
So what do? They up the amount of licensing. My wife's a teacher. She had a bachelor's, she teaches special ed. She had a bachelor's degree. Oh, that wasn't good enough anymore. Mm-hmm. So they came up with another law. Well, she has to do this. And then they came up with another thing. They have to do this. She's got to be highly qualified in math and I think, or English. And she's teaching people who have, an IQ of, say, 70, maybe. Some of them are less than that. I mean, not to say anything bad about the people, but there's no point to it.
Well, and it becomes protectionist. By doing occupational licensing, what you do is you actually create a special interest, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I read a almost laugh out loud example. It had to do with florists. And I was like, okay, I agree, maybe some of this stuff, it's dangerous, but I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess poison ivy, but like, what is possibly so dangerous about making floral arrangements that, we need to protect this? And the way it worked in that state, you had to, I want to say, it was something crazy. It was hundreds of hours. It was like you had to go to school for 2 years kind of thing to get a florist occupational license. But the way it was vetted was they would do flower arrangements, and then they had a panel that would judge it. The panel of people who said, yes, you are allowed to be a florist, or no, you're not allowed to be, were all made up of the people who already had the protected license.
Right.
So they have an interest in being like, I don't think it's that good, right? So they did like a blind test. They let the professionals decide, but then they just got random people. And I mean, there was no difference. I mean, obviously, how a floral arrangement looks is in the eye of the beholder, right? Yeah. So that was just one example. But yeah, I think in general, with something like occupational licensing, what it actually does is it harms, it creates a barrier to entry for new people, and it actually harms poor people that you're trying to help, right? Because suddenly something that should be, hey, I want to go do this, I'm willing to work hard, I want to be productive, I want to contribute, to society, becomes, well, now I have to go into debt. Now I have to, go study this, for 3 years, and it just becomes really hard. So suddenly you're keeping out people that want to work hard and want to do something and want to make something of their lives.
It's also fundamentally contrary to freedom.
Yeah.
Because if I want to try something, to do something, what's to prevent me from doing it? I mean, if I'm doing a bad job, nobody's going to hire me.
Well, the market will let you know, right? If you suck at something, no one's going to hire you.
If I'm taking, wood chips and throwing them on a bunch of flowers and I call it a flower arrangement because I like it.
Hey, maybe it'll be a new trend.
Then that pretty much sums it up. I know one of my favorite liberals is Elizabeth Ropp. She's an absolute sweetheart, right? She does acupuncture, and she has so much tenacity. I hope she doesn't. She's running for, I forget what she's running for, but I hope she's never in Concord because she's going to be too good. Because she's got that energy and that tenacity, and she's just attack. But she's a sweetheart too, so it's a perfect, deadly combination if you're a Republican. But anyway, so
I'm like that too.
Oh gosh. So anyway, she had a bill in because she does things because she really just cares, right? Which I know that's a weird concept. She just really cares. So she's trying to help people in recovery. And I don't know anything about it, but there's a certain ear acupuncture that you can give people in recovery to help with the some of the symptoms of recovery, like anxiety and things like that.
Nausea,
and it's supposed to be very effective. And so what she tried to do was get a bill through to allow her to teach people, their clinicians, how to do it to the people, so that it's something free, that just an extra service like meditation that they can offer these people. And guess who was her biggest opponent?
Acupuncture.
Acupuncture licensing board.
Yeah.
What do you mean you're going to teach them how to do that? Well, then they can do it.
Right.
So what? You're helping people. I thought the whole idea of you guys getting into this to begin with was probably to help people. I don't know anybody who gets into medicine because they really don't care about that and they're just trying to make money.
Right.
And especially in acupuncture, it's not really that lucrative.
Yeah.
And so it was her biggest obstacle to just trying to help people was the licensing board itself,
Yeah.
which is evil.
And that doesn't surprise me. I mean, I see that across various sectors, everything from, real estate, an example there is, on the one side, it's like, oh, we want to reduce these regulations and we want, what do you think about this wetland thing that's going to take a third of the land in New Hampshire? And, all of this is infringing and we should get rid of these regulations. So let's deregulate here. But then if you ask about occupational licensing, oh, no, there we need all of it because, someone could come in from somewhere else and we need more laws. And I think, for me, one of the things I really try to do is I'm very principled, and principles give you consistency because you can look at every issue through the same lens and you can go, okay, what makes sense here, right? So, I think markets over government is what will solve problems because historically, that's how it's worked. I mean, that is where America's prosperity came from, right? It's the more free we had the markets. And, we have this inclination that it's busy work. We all go to Concord and we're like, oh, we have to seem important, so let's write some bills. But it's like, let's not do that. Let's actually look at the principles. Let's stick to that program, meaning the New Hampshire Constitution, and then let's let the market figure it out. Because why shouldn't a doctor be able to do acupuncture if he wants to treat someone? And if he's interested in that, go take a class, from someone. That person's happy because even though maybe you've created competition, you also had a client while you were teaching them. And the market will figure it out because that's what it does. It's a decentralized way of doing decision making.
Yeah, the other thing too is I think if somebody was there's the market and then there's the legal system. Okay, so somebody goes for therapy for let's say a drug addict or something, or somebody who's trying to recover from alcohol or drug addiction. And somebody starts giving them, what do you want, acupuncture? And they hurt them, right? Because they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't take a class. They didn't learn anything. They just said, I figure I can figure this out. I watch YouTube. And they hurt them. They're going to get sued. And then when they get sued, they'll say, well, how much training did you have? Oh, I didn't have any. I saw a YouTube video. Well, they're going to be liable. Well, so learning to do what you need to do is going to be something that you were going to do just to maintain your license and things. It's not like you're going to just invent something and say you know how to do it when you don't.
But also, I mean, the best acupuncturist could maybe have an off day and the same thing would happen. So but then
in court they could say, well, I went through this
Sure,
this
but
training.
if you actually harm someone, there is still a case to be made, right? So,
yes, but there's negligence and then there's gross negligence. Right? The
Right.
gross negligence is I didn't know what I was doing and I did it anyway. Negligence is I screwed up.
But you still have a cause and a case in both those cases,
Yes.
right? And I think there's an onus, on you as the consumer to also be like, well, let me go check. Does this guy have good reviews?
Right.
I don't go to restaurants that have 1 or 2 stars,
Really?
No, I mean, I also don't like pizza, so.
Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt. Could you have your guest put the mic closer to her, please?
Oh, yeah. You're not allowed to read and talk in the mic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Sorry, I move around too much.
That's all right. That's all right. You're getting animated.
Yes, I do. But people when we talk about the markets, it's like people have sort of moved to the sense of the nanny state, right? Where it's like we look to government to solve everything, and it's like, they're very base things, like you said. You will have a right to action, if something goes wrong. I mean, we don't need to be like, let's write something for this particular situation and this one and this one and this one. There are overarching principles and the Constitution and all of those things that actually kind of protect us already.
Yeah, here's one I heard, and I haven't checked to see if this is legit or not, but somebody told me that if you are a felon and you get out of prison, you can't become a tattoo artist.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, why? Why would you even? I'd like to find the genesis of that and repeal that. Because some of the guys who come out of prison, it's actually not a bad occupation, and it would pay the bills.
It would probably be good for them, and possibly they got experience while they were in,
They probably
working
did.
on that.
I met a guy, he took, what the hell did he do? He took, I think it was like a DVD player, the motor from like a DVD player, and a needle from a DVD player, and he was actually doing acupuncture, right?
Right,
Same
the
thing.
tattooing,
Same thing, but
yeah.
with ink.
Oh, wow.
He was doing it, and it was obviously against the rules.
And
But he's super talented.
I mean, it's actually sad to me that, something like the laws that prevent felons from doing certain things afterwards. We've sort of created this culture or this situation where like no one can dig themselves. Like if people make mistakes.
No, I
know,
never did.
And never.
Okay, I just want to make that clear.
Me either.
Okay, all right, yeah.
But and it just makes it so hard. So we end up in this, like, I feel like we're sort of trending towards this situation where we create the problems and then we look to the state to fix the problems. And as we move more towards, having to pay for all these programs and all these things, right? So there are more fingers kind of coming into our pockets and our wallets. But part of it is because we've created the problem to start with, like, let these people work.
Right.
If someone wants to work, why do we have laws saying you can't?
Right. Yeah, I can understand if somebody's been convicted of, child abuse, they can't, work.
Work in a crush.
Yeah, exactly.
But arguably, no one's, from a market perspective, no one's going to want to hire them either, because that's bad for business.
Or the children.
Right.
Yeah. So some.
Well, yeah, but of course.
Somebody's convicted of, grand larceny. Probably you don't want them working in the bank, but that's legit. But the fact that you're like you say, you paint these people into a corner so that when they get out of prison, even if they have all the good intentions and maybe they were just drunk that night, they did something stupid, and they want to work their way back out of the hole, you put all these obstacles in front of them and do what you can to make sure they end up back in prison.
Yeah, and so certainly, I'm a lawyer by training. I don't practice in New Hampshire, but, I would like to look at some of the criminal justice stuff and just kind of go, okay, what is making sense here? I mean, even with the drug laws to some extent,
Yep.
I just feel like we've criminalized so much behavior that's really advice, right? Some people like to drink, some people like to toke. And it's like, because the government said, well, drinking's okay. And in my opinion, alcohol is a harmful drug. And everyone seems to have figured out a way to deal with that. And I'm like, well, can we move down that path with something like marijuana or cannabis prohibition? Because it's just not working.
Hey, you would be very proud of my 15-year-old grandson. We were in Washington, D.C. What week was that? Was that last week? I can't remember what week it is. Things are going by too quick. But we went to Washington, D.C. A delegation from New Hampshire went down there, and we had a meeting in the White House with a bunch of the people that Trump's appointees, including Ben Carson. Mm-hmm. And there was another guy, and I've forgotten his name, was talking about marijuana being the gateway drug, that people who smoke marijuana go on to other drugs. And we're sitting in this room with 60 or so people at the White House. My 15-year-old grandson raises his hand. And the guy he says, sir, is it really a gateway drug, or is it the fact that it's illegal, it forces people to go to people who are selling other illegal drugs to acquire the marijuana, and if they didn't have to do that, they wouldn't be exposed to those other drugs.
Wow, that's brilliant.
Right? And the guy goes, "How old are you?"
You know, and I mean, if people want to reiterate the gateway drug theory, which I think, you know, anyone who studies this issue knows that's kind of made up, then I think you could say, you know, alcohol was probably the gateway drug.
Alcohol is, in my, not experience, because obviously I've never done anything like that. Alcohol, I think, is far more likely to be a gateway drug, in that everybody knows that alcohol lowers your inhibitions. And so if somebody is at a party, quote unquote, and has an illegal substance, and you're half in the bag, ordinarily you would never touch it with a 10-foot pole, but because you're a little bit, you know, tipsy,
Right.
so yeah, I'll try that.
Well, you know,
But people who smoke pot, when they get a little high, they want to play video games and eat Twinkies. I mean, it's...
you know, and even in the prisons, I read an interesting thing recently where it was a warden who said, you know, because first of all, you know, like if we're going to talk about the war on drugs, let's just, you know, talk about the facts. They can't even keep drugs out of prisons. So the fact that we're trying to apply prohibition to the entire nation, where if you are in full control of an isolated geographic area and you can't keep it out, I think that says something about, you know, whether we're going to succeed with that or not. So let's look at fresh, new, different, better approaches. But in the prisons, I mean, the violations, if you're caught with drugs, the penalties, sorry, are actually less harsh than if you're caught mixing hooch, or like, you know, making the fake banana in your sock, you know, weird sock wine or whatever they do. I don't know. I don't know. But anything that you make with alcohol, because they know.
Now, if I went into a restaurant and they had sock wine, I think I would probably not stay there.
I probably would not
Yeah, I'm
drink
just
it
saying,
either.
you
But
know?
okay, so but you understand what I'm saying. So in the prisons, they
Sock
prefer
wine, that's so good.
they prefer that the inmates be on drugs than be on alcohol, because they understand that the alcohol actually often makes them aggressive as
Right,
well.
right.
And so, you know, when I read that, I thought, wow, that's actually really telling, right? In terms of,
really horrible,
you
too.
know, how we've looked at things. And then I also just want to remind people, you know, when we had alcohol prohibition, it was violent. People died. People got sick because it was bad products. It was all of the things that were the result of the prohibition.
Right.
And the minute we did away with that, we figured out a way to make it work within a greater society that did less harm.
That's partially true, but I think that's kind of oversimplification, because you had too many people in government making money off of prohibition.
Oh, you know what? There are many. I mean,
And I think, actually, if we've looked into the heroin problem, if somebody, I think, here, I'll go out on a limb. I like it. I think one of the reasons the relentless attacks on Trump, because I'll make it quick because I don't want to get too far off. Right now, they're attacking Trump because he gave money to Stormy Daniels as hush money. Bill Clinton raped people. He sexually abused people. He assaulted people. All those women that he attacked and made passes at, took his clothes off in front of, all of those women were attacked by either Hillary Clinton or the press.
Oh, yeah.
And called whores. Okay? This woman was actually, that was her job, and he just tried to pay her off to keep it on the down low. And yet, this is a reason for impeachment, whereas Bill Clinton that was okay.
Well, I mean, that wasn't okay because, I mean, the Republicans tried to impeach him too. I think the bigger question is, why are we focusing on nonsense that has nothing to do with how to govern?
Right, well, that's my point. My point is, these relentless and constant attacks is because he threatens the political infrastructure, the shell game that they play year after year, and that's why they're attacking Trump. And I'm willing to bet if they accidentally screw up and all that stuff is wiped away and Trump's actually able to completely take the reins, they're going to find out that there's people in Washington, D.C. right now that are making bank on the heroin epidemic.
I don't doubt it. I mean, if you look at the top 6 donors for lobbying against cannabis reform, they are private prisons, they're police unions, I mean, it's the alcohol industry. And so, I mean, if you look at it through that lens, it's very clear what's going on. It's occupational licensing in a different form, right? It's a form of special interests, and it's a form of protectionism for whatever racket they have going on. And, you know, we've built all these prisons. I mean, more than 2 million people have been incarcerated for marijuana. For what?
Right,
you
right,
know?
right.
It's like, it's a plant. Eventually, you know, we've finally gotten to the stage where we've been able to convince people that it's actually medicine. So think about the insanity of that, right? Where it's
That's not that legit. I mean, heroin is medicine too.
right. And so it's about how you choose to use something.
Right.
Alcohol in moderation is okay. Alcohol not in moderation is probably going to fry your brain over the long term. Cannabis in moderation is probably okay. Opioids, when you've had an operation or there's some reason, morphine will work for you,
Yep.
right? So it's by saying, well, the only way we can deal with these things is we got to make it illegal and then like pretend. It's like, but we're in the real world. Tell people the truth. Tell people you should do this in moderation. You should, you know, if I'm prescribing pills post-operation, you should really only take one if you're in pain. And maybe the doctor should only, you know, write you a script for 7 or whatever they used to do, right? Because part of the problem with the opioids was the Purdue and a couple of the big pharma companies came out with that report.
They were pushing it.
They were pushing it, and they came out with a report that said to doctors, "Oh, morphine, heroin is it's no longer addictive. We did some studies." And it's like, come on, man. I mean, you know, I know my history. I mean, we had the opium wars, back, you know, whenever, the 1669, 15, whenever it was.
Opium wars were 1800s in China.
Yeah, no, but I mean, part of that was all trade and, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's like, let's deal with like the real world. Let's deal with real facts. Let's not create these statutory illusions. And then we, you know, with the war on drugs, certainly, like we're 100 years down the line, and I think it's done an incredible amount of harm. It's harmed people. It's harmed the police community. It's harmed, you know, families. I mean, we talk about cycles of poverty, and it's like, you know, some parent goes away for 2 years for, you know, having a stash of cannabis, and then, you know, you've lost your job. Maybe mom can't work because she has to look after the kids. And the next thing you know, everyone's looking once again to the state to say, well, you have to fix this problem, poverty. You have to fix this problem, broken homes. And it's like, well, let's look at some of the root causes of those things and let's fix that. And people have to have an appetite to just move beyond where we are, and that's what I'm going to bring to the Senate. You know, I love to read, I love to study things, and the things I'm really into, I like to go deep, and I want to be able to be a voice for sort of logic and rationality in an insane world.
Then you can't get elected.
Yeah, probably not. No, I am electable.
No.
See, I have a postcard. It proves I'm electable.
As long as you have a postcard, yeah. Yeah, no, you're. I don't think we agree 100% on all this, but I do agree with the premise that we should be able to look at everything objectively and not with jaundiced eyes, or the way this is the way we've always done
it, you know. And it's like, but the way we've always done it isn't necessarily working.
No, we had. No, I don't want to.
I'm from the future, and I'm here to help.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh. Well, the thing is, I don't necessarily believe in the primacy of the market.
Okay.
I think that's where we differ.
All right.
My belief is that I believe in the market, but if the market isn't metered by morality, it will become as abusive as any socialist country ever could be. I'll give you an example. Back here in Manchester, in the early 1800s or mid 1800s, I think it was Manchester or Lowell, there was one of the people that owned one of these huge factories was talking to a slave owner down south in the early 1800s. And he says, "Oh, the manufacturer said, I'd much rather own a factory than a farm, because if these people, they come in, they're young, 12 years old, they're working in the factory, and if their hand gets cut off, well, hit the road. Whereas the analogy was that the farmer who owned slaves is still responsible for the slave and still has to take care of them, whereas the owner of the factory can just boot them out. And it was pretty brutal how some people were treated, and they could treat them because there was no laws. And it's and to me, if that owner had treated his employees with as much respect as he had for his own kids, nobody would know who Karl Marx is. That's all it would have taken. All you had to do is treat people morally, ethically, and socialism, communism, nobody would even consider it. It would not be like I say, communism would never have existed. Millions of people would still be, well, they wouldn't still be alive today because that was,
That was a while
died
ago.
of old age. But my point is that there's millions of people who never would have been murdered.
Hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions of people that would not have been murdered if people just treated each other with respect. Period.
And human dignity. And
Yeah.
but I'm like, I don't know, like maybe if we spent all the resources, and I would say not all, but half, let's give half back to people. And then we spent the rest of the resources on spreading that message, right?
Right.
About, saying treat people well. And I'm a big proponent of live by example, right? So, put out in the world what you want back, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, historically, horrible mistakes were made. Slavery is, it's a blight. It's something that was terrible. I can't really even fathom it, like it just doesn't make sense to me. But, it's there, and I think we still see problems today from that history. But, let's do better going forward.
Yeah, here's another way to look at that, okay? I've been thinking about that a lot in the last couple of days for some reason. Somebody posted something that made my head start going off on a tangent. I know that's hard to believe. But
No, you?
Yeah, no. It was something about you can judge a man by how he treats his inferiors. Somebody posted that yesterday. And I said, no. The problem is when that person believes he has inferiors is the beginning of the problem. Because it was the belief that there are people inferior that led to the Bataan Death March, the concentration camps, the Trail of Tears. All of those things began with the belief of an individual or individuals that they were somehow superior to another group. As soon as but then I went on and realized how awesome our Constitution is. Because you go back, before that Constitution, most countries, most people lived in a country with some sort of caste system.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, they were either the king, or in India you had our actual caste system. You couldn't hunt the king on the king's land, but you had this document that says all men are created equal. Now, was it perfect when it was signed? No, it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, they got that definition of men wrong.
No, but they got that.
But
premise,
the concept,
the
yes.
concept was so beautiful and so original and so awesome. It led us to a point where today we should never look at anybody else as inferior. They might not be as good at something as you are, but that's not the same as them being inferior. God did not create them to do exactly what you do because he doesn't need two of you.
Right, and the thing is, it's about equality of opportunity,
Yes.
right? So level playing field as opposed to equality. Like, I'm a great cook, but I'm not really good mechanically.
Right.
And so, and that's division of labor in our house, right? I cook and my husband does all the fidgety stuff that I, couldn't be bothered or don't want to learn. I can change a tire. Because everyone should know how to change a tire.
Right.
But I agree with you. Just the concept of, we're all equal in the sense that we have equal opportunity. I mean, of course, not everyone's ever going to be exactly the same. I mean, Kurt Vonnegut, right, wrote that brilliant short story, Harrison Bergeron, right, which was, I think I have both those names right, but possibly not. And it's the one where, it's set in the future and the people have to, if you're a ballerina, you have to wear the weights, and you have to wear the helmets that scramble your thoughts if you're smarter than the guy next to you. And I'm like, who wants to live in that world?
Yes, but it's actually kind of appropriate because what it does is it brings everybody down to the same ability. It doesn't allow the people born with excess ability to ever fly, so to speak.
And honestly, like, something I've been thinking a lot about is I've been working a lot on myself. I quit drinking. I lost a lot of weight. I'm just in a
I got one or two out of those.
How good. I'm sort of in a new direction in my life.
Carla, we only get 2 minutes. How can people get in touch with you?
Yes. You can find me on my website, carla4nhsenate.com. You can also find me on Facebook. You can find me on email. Everything's on my website. Go to carla4nhsenate.com. These are my signs. I don't know where to show it. I think it's over there. So if you see these out and if you want a yard sign, please contact me. People are calling me every day. Campaign's going really well. I wish we talked about that, but this way people get to know me.
Right. Ask Senator D'Alessandro. I think he voted for Marsies Law. You're the voters. Ask him about it. Why the heck did he vote for such a piece of garbage?
And he voted against both those constitutional amendments, which passed by bipartisan support in both houses.
So those are good things, because he's a nice guy, but he's not necessarily on the right side of the issue. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, my friend Jane Cormier has her signs being decimated. If you see somebody messing with other people's campaign sign,
my signs too.
Yeah, take a video and send it to the cops, because it's highly illegal and it's just bad sportsmanship.
It's bad sportsmanship.
Carla, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I love doing this show.